understand a word she was saying. Have you ever felt that way? I was just trying to help her, and yet our frustration was growing. A friend of mine introduced me to Mary, who was new to our neighborhood. She was new to our country. And since I was learning to speak Spanish, my friend thought it would be a great introduction. Mary needed to learn English. And if you had been there, you could have sensed the growing frustration as we struggled to communicate. Because the Spanish that Mary was speaking was not the same Spanish that I had learned. And as our tension grew, eventually Mary just put her hands up and shook her head and looked at me as though we were completely missing the point of getting together. And in that moment, we began to look beyond the language barrier, beyond the differences in our background, skin color, religion, and age. And we shifted to speaking the language of humanity, a language which brings people together at the core, a language which aims simply to connect rather than to convince. Although we couldn't understand each other's words, we were able to understand each other as human beings. And we did this simply by drawing pictures, pointing out items in the room, and even acting out various concepts that we wanted to share with each other. We formed a connection of understanding that could have easily been missed had we not been willing to set aside our agenda and simply learn from each other. And that day, I learned that Mary, who was so far away from everything that she knew and loved, was aching to reach out to others, to make new friends, and to contribute to her new community. But both language and cultural barrier often left her feeling lonely and isolated. Have you ever felt that way? It's difficult to communicate with those who speak different languages, isn't it? But more often, we struggle to communicate with those who do speak the same language. Think of the last time you felt misunderstood by a boss, or a neighbor, or a loved one. Even when we speak the same languages, various social and cultural overlays strongly influence how we perceive and interpret each other, and also whether or not we understand each other. But we all started out as infants, and our words and their messages were both identical, no matter where we lived, no matter where we were born. And the purpose of our words and their messages were to elicit and form a connection with someone to ensure our survival. But over time, we each learned different languages and cultural ways of expressing that basic human need, which we never outgrow. Although our words are no longer the same across cultures, our message is something we will never outgrow. And that is that we need to connect with others so that we can survive. I learned about one of these baby's words when my youngest daughter was a baby. And it was interesting to find out that based on the natural reflexes, when an infant is engaged in the sucking reflex, the tongue will raise to the roof of the mouth. And when sound is added, the word that is produced is ne. So no matter which language you speak, ne is produced with the tongue in the same position. Imagine sucking on a straw. Where's your tongue? Pay attention to that while you listen to this clip. That's my friend's baby. Isn't she adorable? Did you see that? Could you hear it? That sweet little baby was reaching out for the nourishment that comes from both food and connection. Both are essential to life. And as infants, we naturally used language to connect. Another natural reflex, after the baby needs to eat, she'll need to burp. Burping is just another natural reflex. And in some parts of the country, some parts of the world, burping indicates that you enjoyed your meal. But in the US, if you were to belch your compliments to the chef, you might be asked to leave the table. It's not considered good manners. But as infants, burping was just all in a day's work for every one of us. You know what it feels like, don't you? When air is trapped in the esophagus, and the back of the throat opens wide, the tongue and the jaw move open. And when an infant adds sound to this natural reflex, what we hear is eh. So I want you to try something with me. On my signal, I don't want you to burp, okay? But is the word I'd like you to say with me 3 times. You ready? Eh. Congratulations. You just spoke in Spanish, English, and Urdu. And every one of us, as infants, those words were all the same. And just as a mother gently wraps her infant in layers of blankets to keep her warm, so too do we cover our children in blankets of identity to tell them who they are. And society and culture and the media also covers us in blankets of identity to try to tell us who we are. Let's explore some of those. When we're born, we're each given a name. What's your name? What does it mean? My name's Charity, in case you were wondering. And my parents taught me that charity means unconditional love, pure love. No pressure, right? That's one of my layers of identity. Another is birth order. Where are you in your family? I'm the oldest girl of 11 children. I have 2 older brothers. Yeah, it's a big family, right? And with a big family, sometimes that unconditional love was a little difficult to come by, especially when my sister was stealing my clothes. But it's okay, Rebecca, I forgive you. How about the layer of economic status? With a big family on a small budget, my parents did the best they could. They gave us everything that they could. And it wasn't easy, though. We struggled. We all have our struggles. And I remember devouring the free school lunches that we qualified for because it meant more food in my tummy. Economic status is another layer. And then we have layers that other people try to place on us, right? Like I remember being called anorexic, a charity case. We've had experiences like that make you wonder, am I good enough? Is there something wrong with me? And it hurts, and it makes us wonder, and it can rattle around in our brain for years. But one of the things that I really appreciate about the layers in our life also is a layer of our sense of humor. In our family, we learned to laugh at each other, laugh with each other, and sure, sometimes we took it a little too far. But I appreciate that sense of humor. And one time, we were in our station wagon, all the kids' heads hanging out the window, tails flapping in the wind like a puppy dog. No. And on the street corner, we had pulled up, and someone from the side of the street said, "Hey, Mom, look, it's the Brady Bunch." We always laugh at that. That layer of humor helped us get through some tough times. Life is tough enough. Sense of humor was really important in our family, and I appreciate that. and on, these layers. We could talk endlessly about these layers in our lives. Until eventually, there's just a small portion of people buried under piles that look just like yours. And we can tell who speaks the same language just by understanding their layers. And sometimes we think we can tell who doesn't speak the same language and who we can't relate to because, well, look at that mess of blankets on top of them. So different from yours. Each of these layers shape the way we behave, interact, and think. They're also tied to the language that we speak. And in learning to speak our native language, we accomplish great things, don't we? But sometimes what gets buried and forgotten underneath all of these layers is the very fact that we were all born members of the same human race. We were all born with the same core needs. And we were all born speaking that same universal language, that language of connection. If the most instinctive yet vital role of language is to connect so that we as humanity can survive, then perhaps it's fair to say that connection is the language of humanity. And if we are to strengthen the cause of humanity, we have to learn to speak this language of connection across these perceived chasms of culture. See, culture did not exist for any one of us the day we were born. It's learned and developed over time, layer upon layer. And that was fine when our tribes were scattered across the world, primarily interacting with neighboring cultures. But we live in a global world. And we have the responsibility to strengthen humanity because we are so interconnected in our world today. These layers of culture can either connect us and bring us together, or they can push us apart. We make that choice. When I was in my early 20s, I didn't know that I had a choice. You see, my layers, I was buried so deeply underneath my layers, and I became at a point in my life that I felt extremely disconnected. I was alive, but I wasn't living. I was going through the motions, but I felt hollow, like a stranger in my own life. And my turning point was attending a mental health seminar that I did not want to be at. My friend had elbowed me into this. And at this event, I took an assessment which indicated that I had severe depression. Depression? That was news to me. Up until that point, I never thought of myself as a depressed person. I was someone with depression. Because on the outside, I was helping others, I was showing up, I was putting a smile on my face. But on the inside, I had let the external critics become my internal critic. And I was destroying myself because of the toxic culture of my own mind. And recognizing that I had a choice was a long process. It was a really long and painful process. But one of the most important things that I learned is that these layers that we create in our lives, yes, they are a part of who we are, and I'm so grateful for those layers. They are always and will always be a part of who I am. But they do not determine who I become. That's my choice. And many people are reaching out for connection in positive and healthy ways. But there are many whose core need for connection is not being met. Perhaps it's someone you know who's reaching out in unhealthy ways, through crime and violence, self-harm, addictions, depression, and even suicide. People are literally dying from the lack of connection. It's as vital to life as food and water. But we have the power and the responsibility to nourish each other through connection. And that comes through love and compassion, through listening and learning from each other, and through just reaching out and being there. Connection. It is a need that we will never outgrow. And so now, as I look at each of you, much like pulling back these layers to get to the infant who still resides in each one of us, when I learned to look beyond race and religion, ethnicity, economic status, sexual orientation and background, but especially when I learned to look beyond my own layers, and yes, I appreciate them, but when I look beyond them, then it's easier for me to accept you, to care for you, and to love you, because I just see you like I see me, a vulnerable human at the core whose experiences have shaped the way we view the world. Although our words are no longer the same across cultures as they were when we were infants, at the heart of it all, we still have the same needs of that baby who needed connection so that she could survive. And through this model of looking beyond our layers, I can develop and exhibit and practice my humanity with you, because I remember again my core message and our core message and what we need most. I had just forgotten how to say it.